We knew we had to do Long Way Up.
Previously on the Harley-Davidson podcast.
I think it was probably Russ suggested that we went on electric motorbikes.
I don't think we thought that Harley would be making an electric motorcycle.
With the LiveWire, the fact that they were sort of leading the fray into this, I thought that was quite exciting. We wanted to be part of that.
At the time, LiveWire was a prototype.
But we showed a couple bikes, the LiveWire, and then we also showed our Pan America, not in production yet.
They came to us with the ambition and the very singular point of view that this would be an electric motorcycle expedition.
It looked like this really cool adventure bike. You put the front end of the Pan American on it. You jacked up the back. You put panniers on the back, changed the seat. Higher handlebars. I mean, a lot of work.
Welcome to the Harley-Davidson podcast, Long Way Up Edition, a 6-part series where we dive into the epic 13,000-mile trip taken by Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman that took them from Ushuaia, South America, up to Los Angeles, and all on electric Harley-Davidson LiveWires. In this episode, we'll hear from the Harley-Davidson engineers and designers that brought these bikes to life.
Early on, Ewan and Charlie had decided that they wanted to do Long Way Up on electric motorcycles, and it was a question as to which manufacturer they would go with. My name is Ben McKinley, and I'm an industrial design manager at Harley-Davidson Styling and Design. The LiveWire it's a street bike. It's made to work really well on pavement, and it handles well. It's an awesome bike to ride in the city. But it was never really designed with the thought in mind that you would take it on a gravel road or take it off-road or ride it for thousands of miles in rough conditions. We were actually really fortunate, when this whole project came across, that we have Pan America in development.
Since the beginning of the company, we made bikes when there weren't roads, when there weren't paved roads. So to a lot of people, I'm like, we were the original adventure touring motorcycle. My name's Brad Richards, and I'm the Vice President of Styling and Design at Harley-Davidson. Pan America is going to be one of the most capable adventure touring motorcycles in the world. So we had world-class componentry that we had sitting there that we were working with.
So that gave us something that we could take prototype parts from. So the forks themselves, they're straight off of Pan America, more or less. And so we're able to take that as well as a bunch of the knowledge that the engineering team had from developing Pan Am. We're able to build that all into this bike. And so it ends up sort of becoming a mashup of Pan America and LiveWire.
We had these parts, but how do we bring it all together and actually make a functioning, capable, off-road motorcycle out of something that was never designed to be that?
It's pretty easy to mash up parts and things from different models here in Photoshop or whatever, and you take the front end off of a Pan America and you jack the back end up a few inches to give it a little bit more suspension travel. It's maybe a bit of a different story for the engineering team having to actually make these things work beyond just the 2D sketch. That's certainly where a lot of the heavy lifting came in.
Of course, as an engineer, you get excited about that because you love that kind of challenge, and I've been doing this all my life. Jim Federico, VP of Engineering at Harley-Davidson. I said, well, let's take a look at this. If we did 2 one-off bikes and we did this, so we just ran through a set of what can we do. This is volunteer time for my team, by the way. We are booked solid with projects for our life cycle plan. We are, committed to deliver production bikes, many bikes, not just EVs. So this had to be evenings, weekends, in between breaks while you're getting your everyday job done. And so I needed the right people. So went to my engineering team and I brought in the 2 key leaders, Glenn Koval, the chief engineer, and his manager at the time, Rachel Wildey.
When I think back, it was a little bit insane. My name's Glenn Koval. I am General Manager of Engineering. We pulled together the different areas that we were going to redesign and build from the ground up and said, okay, let's go take experts from all of those areas around the organization. We pulled them into a room and said, here's the challenge. We have 4 weeks to go do this. And there was that kind of almost fall out of the chair moment from most of the team. But when they looked at it and they thought about it, they're like, yeah, we can do this. Let's go do this.
Charlie and Ewan had some great requests, things that we hadn't thought of. Some of them we kind of looked at them and we're like, okay, never really thought about that, but sure, we can do that. Why can't we? I'm Rachel Wildy. I am an engineering manager over EV Special Projects. Some good suggestions from them that we were able to pretty quickly put into play.
They talked about suspension. They talked about having windscreen protection. A huge request was being able to carry all of their gear, especially all the cameras on the bikes.
Not only were we looking at trying to maximize the range that they could go on an electric bike, but we were also charging all of their equipment.
Having additional auxiliary plugs to plug in their headsets and power their cameras while they're riding, to different luggage requirements. And they had very unique seat requirements on making sure that fit them and was comfortable. So there was an awful lot of requests.
We started mocking up the bikes. Started with a standard LiveWire, pre-production, because that's all we had, and started 3D printing key parts and pieces, working with our battery supplier on where we could push the range, making sure we have diagnostics that'll live through these temperatures. And then the biggie was, okay, raise up the bike, greater suspension, tires, wheels that are made for that kind of environment. And that one was the challenge. And with some clever engineering, we were able to take the appropriate, I'll just call it off-roading components of Pan America and integrate that into LiveWire. Some of it we did quickly by analysis, as in on our CAE, computer-aided engineering. So could we fit this? We can machine the steer stem out of a nice, beautiful block of aluminum and then change this, build this, do this. And within another couple weeks, we had a runner, a bike that was converted, if you will, modified, and got pretty excited. Went out in the parking lot at PDC, took it for a ride, started jumping some curbs with it.
I remember riding it. I think I might have been the second person to ride it after Jim Federico. He brought it over and asked me to ride it, and we took it out I jumped on it in the parking lot and took it for a run. And I remember going out on the streets around the product development center in Wauwatosa and just thinking, wow, this is actually a really comfortable motorcycle, and a really, already just with sort of bolting some of the Pan America suspension bits to it, it was actually a great bike already. And I think, again, that speaks to the fact that we have great bones. After our initial test rides, Jim and I kind of nodded at each other and said, okay, let's move forward. And then his crew just took off at 1,000 miles an hour because they knew they had this deadline to meet. So it was a bit of a, round the clock, full court press to get the bikes ready for Ewan and Charlie. And they had asked for a bit of a test ride in Los Angeles.
Charlie and Ewan still wanted to just make sure we have to ride something now, because they were rolling up towards a date and a decision. The decision was, to them, number one, are we going to do EV? And number two, the decision was, is Harley-Davidson the EV bike that they would do? So we packed up a couple bikes, put them in a truck and trailer, hauled them out to LA, and I had Glenn Koval be there with them.
There are some epic rides along the Pacific coast, west and north of Malibu, Topeka Canyon. And so we rode for an entire day with them, trying to teach them how to ride and dial in and optimize range.
Here's Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman.
When we finally saw the first one that rolled off the lorry, and it looked like this really cool adventure bike.
The ramp came down, and there was one LiveWire and one long way up LiveWire, the sort of mock-up prototype of our adventure bike. And we were just like kids in a candy store, like looking at these two bikes coming out.
You put the front end of the Pan American on it. You jacked up the back. You put panniers on the back, changed the seat. Higher handlebars. I mean, a lot of work.
And that first ride, when it came out of the trailer, we took it and round the canyon roads, round by Malibu.
This is where I was sweating it a little bit. We're trying to hit 200 miles worth of range, and they're doing aggressive accelerations up and down mountains, which is the exact opposite of what you want to do with range. And we're 20 miles into the route that I was planning to take them on. My anxiety went through the roof at about that point, but they wanted to go canyon riding. So it was less about the range to them. They wanted to see how these things handed on the twisties and up and down the mountains and the hills. And then after seeing the final route, that made sense. This was pretty rugged terrain that they were riding through. They wanted to see if those bikes would hold up through that.
We just couldn't believe it. I remember by the time we got to the top of the hill, we decided this is the bike for us, you know. We just got off. We'd ridden it for about 10 minutes. We got off and went, oh, this is it. Let's do this. Let's do this.
You know, the first thing when you ride the electric bikes, you know, the first thing you realize is you know there isn't this big noise from the engine. And that when we were riding through one of the little canyons, you know, we were looking over each other and we were talking to each other, and you could hear each other.
It was really exciting to ride. You know, we were giggling away. You know, we were whooping away in our helmets.
It was a few hours of that. They pushed it. They pushed the range. They pushed everything, and they basically stopped and said, "This is the bike. You guys are it. We still need A, B, C, and D. Please get rolling, and then we'll be back in town." Back in Milwaukee and check them out.
Testing started to happen at Yucca, at our Arizona proving grounds. Testing happened at the PDC as well.
In this short period of time, we didn't do as much testing as we would typically do for a production bike. Typically, we would spend about a year running tests on these bikes and running more than just one bike through the testing as well to ensure that we have really good, robust designs. We actually did a lot of virtual analysis to make sure that with the expected impacts and some of those types of forces that we were going to see, we analyzed it using the computers. Of course, that doesn't always take away the actual on-bike testing. So we did spend about a week straight out in Arizona at the proving grounds, going up hills, going through all of our off-road courses. And then, frankly, we spent a lot of time just testing the components. We put it a little bit on the shaker, one of the pieces of equipment that we have in Wauwatosa at the Product Development Center. And we shook it to make sure that we weren't going to see any failures that were going to stop the bike from making it all the way up the 14,000 miles. So we knew that there were probably going to be some impacts and maybe something would crack, but what we didn't want to see was the loss of any actual ability to ride the bike.
And with that is when we were getting to that next level.
Probably the most important thing going from a street bike to something that's suited for an adventure like this was kind of getting the suspension right. And so we started with parts from Pan America because we had that in development.
The front end of the Pan America was some work that we did on what we call the steer stem of the frame, and that's where the front fork bolts into the main frame.
We got prototype forks with more travel. We got a billet aluminum steering neck to make sure that that front end geometry is correct and make sure we can get that 19-inch wheel kind of clearing everything up front.
We modified the steer stem on the LiveWire, and we designed that to be modular to begin with. So that worked out well. And we put the Pan America suspension. And keep in mind, a Pan America is a much taller bike, substantial travel that you need for these off-roading events. That worked. It fit. It looked awesome. We had to modify, obviously, fenders and different parts to make that work and make sure the brake system works well and how we integrate that into the rest of the bike.
LiveWire is basically a street fighter. So it's low to the ground. It's a sport bike. There's no frame protecting the powertrain on the bottom of the bike, which is, if you watch any adventure touring riding, you'll notice that the bottom of the bike is always protected with bash guards and a frame to protect the powertrain, because in between the wheels, you typically do bang off rocks and things. And so LiveWire has a motor, the motor is hanging down there completely exposed with no protection. So that was another design challenge. So we were able to lick that with some very clever use of stone guards and just protection that we provided for the powertrain.
The rear was more difficult. The actual monoshock, the rear suspension, was not just a plug and play off the Pan America. So we worked with our rear suspension supplier on LiveWire. We built up a new suspension and a prototype, sent that to them and said, could you give us a couple of these that meet these requirements relative to travel, damping, and so on. We bolted those in, did a little bit of tuning, and we raised this bike up.
We actually tested a couple of different tires to see what would work best with the capabilities of the LiveWire. And we ran out at our Arizona proving grounds. We actually ran them off-road in some deeper sand, some of the same types of terrain that we expected to see along the trip. And what we found is the Pan America production tire was the best. So it was the best both on highway and at higher speeds for not increasing the drag so that we continue to get the best efficiency out of the bike. But it also provided the best control in some of the off-road portions of it. Charlie and Ewan, they had been pretty set on the tires that they had used for the last two series, knobby tires. And we tested them and we saw we're going to lose some significant efficiency, so range on an electric bike, that we really didn't want to give up. We made the recommendation and they allowed us to continue with that recommendation.
Because of the two different architecture designs in those motorcycles, we couldn't just take Pan America wheels and put them on LiveWire. We had to weld three pieces together. It's something we haven't done in wheels before. And it was a unique challenge to machine out a billet, weld them all up, and make sure that they lived on that journey.
The other main requirement from Charlie and Ewan was really the storage capability on the bike and how are we going to kind of get their gear on LiveWire. And LiveWire was never really designed to have, saddlebags or packs bolted to it and all this extra weight kind of hanging out over the rear wheel. So that was another design challenge.
They're living out of these bikes. So they need major storage, saddlebags, rear, what we call tour packs in our other bikes, but rear boxes, if you will, that'll carry cameras, luggage, toiletries, clothes that they're going to live with on this bike. They didn't want hard luggage. They wanted soft that could be pulled off the bike. Built a rear structure behind the seat to be able to handle substantially more weight.
We had to redesign the whole rear end. And as we're doing that, and they wanted luggage, we also had to have attachment points and luggage racks to hold the soft bags that we put on these bikes.
The riding position from a LiveWire to something that's set up to do more of this off-roading where you actually want to be able to stand, significantly different riding position. So we moved the foot pegs on the long way up version of the LiveWire in order to give them a lot more ability to be able to stand. We also took the seat and changed it into a solo seat to give them a little bit better of a position. So the seats were prototypes. We actually had our seat manufacturer come in. We mocked it up. We had a number of different people stand on it, experience it, see if we felt as though that seat position was right.
And they came up with a new seat, much firmer foam, thicker foam.
And then the last part of the rider triangle is the handlebars. And we actually modified those too. So we wanted it to be a little bit more of an upright position. And so we've raised the handlebars and brought them back towards the rider, giving them a much more upright kind of position.
Then you're adding element protection and auxiliary lighting and roll bars if you're dropping it. So, points where you can grab it and pick it up. All of that came into it, and that's just on the chassis side. Then you start taking the EV systems and the battery and the range.
The range request by the Long Way Up team was extreme, and no one in the industry can do that yet. Energy density is a technology and a state of the technology that we have state-of-the-art today. And we knew they asked for more than what we would deliver. Good news is we already had been very into this. We knew this was a one-off event, and we did push the limits along with our supplier. In other words, let it charge further if the life and the health of the batteries, you don't want to overcharge and you don't want to over discharge. So the two ends, if you will. We pushed both ends, knowing that this would be a more extreme test for it, but we had confidence that it could do it, and it did. So we pushed the limits on both sides. It helped inch our way up, if you will, towards their target.
This stretched our comfort zone in engineering about how do we solve this problem. And really, there's a couple big facets. One is how you ride, your behaviors and how you use the throttle. We have regenerative braking, which puts energy back into the battery. How you use that and how your riding conditions and your riding behaviors can help enhance range in a really big way. There's calibration to help that rider get there so that you're not jerky on the throttle, you're not changing a lot of the energy levels. And then there's software in the battery itself, where we change the limits of how much energy we're using in the battery. All of those things together got us to an extended range.
So some of it was education, talking to the guys about, hey, let's keep the speed below here if you want to get optimized range. The other thing is the way that you use the throttle. If you're constantly on and off of the throttle, it actually takes more energy. So it was a very smooth operation, and we were actually able to train them how to modify the throttle response on the LiveWires.
We had different ratios in different programmable ride modes. So we set up a specific ride mode for them that still gives them the off-road capability, but has as much regenerative braking, which recharges the battery, especially in the mountains and so on they're going to ride. So they may use a lot of energy to get up that mountain. And if they have a 4 to 6 mile stretch going down the mountain, on that other side, we injected more regenerative recharging power down that hill. Of the two bikes, we even did a special color, and that is blue. And it's a beautiful blue. Our design team, Brad Richards' team, did a wonderful job supporting that bike.
I remember rolling the first bike out, and it was the blue one that Ewan rode out of the PDC and riding it up and down the parking lot in the PDC, and just the head turns from the employees walking in and out and stopping. I mean, we had a crowd within 5 minutes of just doing a little parking lot, ride evaluation. Pretty awesome. So the whole building was excited and engaged when they started seeing this. We had Charlie and Ewan come to the PDC. Prior to that, Charlie had been here to do kind of fitment and move some foot pegs and handlebars around, kind of final posture. But then the final sign-off was Ewan and Charlie getting on the bikes and then going for a ride.
We came to Milwaukee and we came to your testing facility there and saw our bikes, in the blue and the orange. And it was just it was a great trip. It was quite exciting to come to Harley-Davidson anyway, And you arrive out the front of the building and just all the staff's bikes are lined up, hundreds and hundreds of bikes. And I loved it. I loved being there and meeting the people and all the technicians and talented people who were involved in creating our trip bikes, sort of in their spare time. We learned, that people had gone out of their way to just do it after work. And we were so impressed. We're so grateful, for everybody's input.
They took the two bikes. Rachel and I were on production level LiveWires, and we did like a 60-mile loop through Holy Hill and a bunch of back roads that we know pretty well here.
It's a bunch of twisties and a really cool road, and they took one last ride.
We did a couple of our ride with Rachel on another LiveWire, who became an integral part of our team from Harley, and they were the bikes just were so lovely to ride,
Every few miles they would stop, and there was, high-fiving, lots of superlatives, swearing and stuff from them. They're just loving it.
After all of this, they took a bike that really worked and they changed the front, the geometry of the front end of it. It was totally different, and they made a completely new headstock for this new suspension on the front and everything. But it was so beautifully set up.
Whoever set that bike up, oh my gosh. The dark art of rebound and suspension and all that kind of stuff, and it was a real dark art. It just was was amazing. And then not only did you do that, but you went off into the desert and tested it to within an inch of its life.
They put in our little camera box on the back there was like a list of different suspension settings that we might want to, if we want to change it along the way. We never touched it. It was so well set up, on road or off. It was great.
What's really fun about these adventures is figuring out where you want to go, what route you want to take.
On the next episode of the Harley-Davidson podcast, Long Way Up Edition.
Traveling from the tip of South America on an electric motorcycle. Obviously, there's going to be some logistical things that need to be thought through beforehand.
We had to send down all of the parts we thought we would need.
You are dealing with the punches as they come. Just a lot of things that happen that you don't expect along the way.
At some point in time, I was like, hey man, I speak the language. You got to send me down there.
There wasn't enough time to panic, so we all just kind of ran towards that timing and did our damnedest to deliver those bikes.
There was a really steep learning curve in the freezing cold, in the snow. That's where we started.
Worst winter since 1974. It was just extraordinary.
Catch new episodes of Long Way Up exclusively on Apple TV+.